House Democrats are trying once again to pass their nearly $2 trillion social spending bill known as the Build Back Better plan amid the highest inflation rates in 3 decades. But what's in the bill? And President Biden met virtually with China's President Xi on Monday. Joining us to discuss this and much more, senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman, thank you for being here. I want to start with the infrastructure bill. You were one of the 13 Republicans who voted for that bill. I know you voted for that because you felt you needed to rebuild the infrastructure in your district, which is crumbling. But the bill actually gives the feds more power to decide where that money goes. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, Raymond, that's always the case. As a matter of fact, there's $550 billion that's new. The rest of it is the reauthorization of existing programs. And those formulas and that money is usually done, hopefully fairly, in a way that goes to the greatest need. And that's what I will be doing now for the next 5 years, because it is a 5-year plan, to make sure that what needs to be targeted with those funding funds gets it.
How do you feel about a guy like our former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu being named infrastructure czar? I mean, he spent millions taking down statues here in New Orleans while we had potholes everywhere and the streets are constantly flooded because of his mismanagement of the Sewage and Water Board.
Well, you know, the good thing is that usually the staff that is institutional, the people who actually do the real work, and not the czar and others who are good for photo ops, that they'll get it right based on need. I was a little surprised at that as well. There are a lot of people in the Biden administration that just, you know, are not up to the task, but that professional staff hopefully will do the right thing. And that's what we have to do as congressmen, oversight.
Let's talk about this upcoming Build Back Better Act that the White House has been touting now for months. This is a massive measure, spending bill that contains universal pre-K, electric vehicle tax credits, paid leave. Why is there no support in the GOP for this bill?
Well, frankly, you said it. It's advertised at $2 trillion. The Chamber of Commerce says it's at least $4 trillion and maybe more. So there's all kinds of gimmicks. It may even go higher. We don't know that, but it's at least $4.1 trillion at a time when our deficit is exploding, and the case for those programs have not been made. It is also the most pro-abortion piece of legislation that I've seen in years, because it has all of these programs, reinsurance programs, health programs, and of course an expansion of Obamacare without the Hyde Amendment, which means more abortion payments. The Catholic Conference put out a very strong letter, as did Susan B. Anthony and National Right to Life and others, saying this is absolutely unacceptable. There are 25 states that voted themselves to say we don't want to pay for any abortions, and that half of those by 2024 will be overturned explicitly in this legislation if it becomes law, to pay for abortion on demand in their states. Talk about states' rights being violated, but above all, the rights of an unborn child to exist, to grow and thrive, cut short by government funding that's used to effectuate their demise.
Wow. Most people are not talking about those aspects of the bill.
No, they're not. And Raymond, I can't say it enough. The money, it is overwhelmingly filled with money for abortion. There's spigot after spigot after spigot that will fund abortion on demand. They're not talking about it. We are, and the pro-life groups are. Thankfully, the Catholic Conference is speaking out very, very loudly. There was a letter signed by
Here's
6
my question.
leaders. Yes.
My question is Joe Manchin listening to you all? Because he's really the buck where the buck will stop.
It's a great question. He is very well aware of the huge abortion expansion provisions. And again, you know, Cardinal Dolan, Archbishop Naumann, and others, 6 in all, signed a very strong letter. And even when you mentioned the pre-K against the bill, when you mentioned pre-K, there's language in there that will preclude Catholic early education from being funded. Again, here we go again, discriminating against the Catholics in one of these and other people of faith in these bills. And I will be voting decidedly no and speaking out against it.
On ABC this week, Brian Deese, who's the director of the National Economic Council, had this to say when asked about rising inflation and the discontent with the current economy. Listen.
Well, inflation is high, and it's affecting Americans in their pocketbook and their outlook. But that concern actually underscores why it's so important to move forward on the Build Back Better bill that Congress is considering. And this is important. Far from adding to inflation concerns, this bill will do the opposite. Because it's fully paid for.
Congressman Smith, is this bill fully paid for?
It's not fully paid for, and it has a huge increase in taxes, including on corporations. So that's a serious problem. But all of this spending, when it's not really targeted the way the infrastructure bill was targeted, all of this spending leads to inflation. I mean, let's not forget, the Biden administration got an almost $2 trillion CARES package, so-called, for the, I understood it during the Trump years because it was paying for programs to keep people from going belly up in terms of their businesses. That's not the case now. So they have, and when I spoke out against the extending the national debt authorization, that there were $800 billion as of the end of August that had been unspent and unobligated, 1.3 trillion unspent and unobligated. But all this money just sitting in a pot somewhere, and now they're going to put more money into the Build Back Better so-called legislation. It is a very, very bad bill. It will absolutely increase inflation, and people are being hit right between the eyes, particularly those on a fixed income and those, in the middle class wage earners. Why would we want to do that? And you remember, Yellen and all the others were saying all those times on the TV that don't worry, it's a short-term thing. It's not a short-term thing.
Congress and the White House, Congressman Smith, have poured $1.9 trillion in new spending into this economy as of March, after about $4 trillion in COVID relief in 2020. Yet American purchasing power has declined. The average standard of living has fallen. When you factor in the gas prices, I don't see how any of this tames inflation. I want to play something here for you. This is Joe Manchin, who says he will not support the bill in its current form. Earlier this month, he had this to say.
I will not support a reconciliation package that expands social programs and irresponsibly adds to our $29 trillion in national debt that no one seems to really care about or even talk about. Nor will I support a package that risks hurting American families suffering from historic inflation.
What do you make of Manchin's assessment, Congressman Smith? And is this bill riddled with budget gimmicks, as Senator Manchin contends?
Yes, he's right on every aspect that he has said, and he is very pro-life, so we're counting on him not to allow this bill to go forward with 50+1 votes, and that's why they're using reconciliation. The filibuster does not apply here, but he's absolutely right. This is a monstrosity of legislation that will hurt the economy, and of course, it will kill unborn children.
Yeah. One of the budget gimmicks in the bill, and I just read about this, is it has money allocated for a child tax credit for illegal immigrants. It would end the requirement for a valid Social Security number, extending the child credit to undocumented families, covering approximately 675,000 children. This means that for a family with 3 children, the fully refundable $10,800 child tax credit payment would exceed the entire average income of several South and Central American countries. We already have a crisis on the border. Doesn't this incentivize more people to come here illegally should this bill pass?
No doubt about it. This incentivizes, this becomes an additional magnet. Not building the wall certainly created a magnet. That wall should be up. And let me remind everyone that in 2006, the Secure Fence Act passed the House of Representatives, the Senate, was signed into law. People like Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton all voted for it. And the goal was to do exactly what Trump wanted to do, and that is to build a wall that would mitigate this violation of our boundaries. This provision in the legislation is another example of why this is an egregiously flawed piece of legislation. Added to that, the budget gimmicks you mentioned, the way that they're advertising it at $1.75 trillion when it's really $4 trillion. One of the main budget gimmicks is to have sunset provisions that will not be followed. So a huge spending program begins and then ends 2 years later. Good luck. Or a year later, it will be extended. So, this is supposed to be over a 10-year period. Well, over a 10-year period, these things will be reauthorized. It could be changed potentially by a future president. But, in the short term, we have Biden for at least 3 years.
Well, government never scales down. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats in power, government never shrinks itself. It's a self-defeating proposition.
Very true.
I want to move on to another topic. Monday evening, President Biden and Chinese President Xi held a virtual summit to discuss several topics, including Taiwan and China's human rights abuses. How do you think the administration has dealt with China so far when it comes to not only human rights, but religious rights and holding China accountable?
Well, they've done very little. Matter of fact, a little bit of rhetoric here and there, a couple of sanctions imposed upon Hong Kongers, leaders in Hong Kong. But Xi Jinping, the man with whom he had the dialogue with, is the reason why the Muslim Uyghurs are being destroyed under the most horrific circumstances, put into concentration camps. Taiwan is in the crosshairs, and I think the calculation that Xi Jinping will make is that he looks at Afghanistan and our horrific withdrawal and leaving Americans behind, as well as those who fought with us, and all of the other flaws of that terrible withdrawal and the loss of life. And he looks at that and says, and I read the Chinese newspapers, in English, of course, including the People's Daily, and they keep telling the Taiwanese, don't think America will have your back. Look what Biden has done. So he really is a very ineffective president. I wish that was not the case when it comes to human rights, and especially with regards to China. And if you look back over the years, he has always, even on something like the forced abortion policy in China, and I have led on that for 40 years. They now changed it, but when it was very much in effect. He went to Beijing, met with students and people of higher education, and said, I understand why you have the one child per couple policy, and gave them the green light. I rushed over to the floor of the House of Representatives and he was then a senator, and did a very strong statement against that kind of enabling of human rights abuse.
Before I run out of time, I've got literally 1 minute. The Vatican ambassador, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, made a statement to the U.S. bishops this week. He said we need a synodal approach when it comes to abortion, and that means looking closer at the reasons women abort their children and providing services to expectant mothers. Your reaction to those comments?
Well, my wife and I have been in the pro-life movement for almost 50 years each, and I have been just inspired by how the Catholic Church, how the pro-life movement, the organizations, pregnancy care centers, and outreach to women like Project Rachel, who have had abortions, and help them find reconciliation and a pathway towards peace and wholeness. It is the pro-life movement that does that, and the Catholic Church and other churches. It's already being done. Meeting that need, is what the pregnancy care centers are all about. If a woman is unattendedly pregnant, they're there saying, we love you both and we will help you. So for him to admonish that kind of outreach, it's already being done. We also need to stop the funding. He ought to speak out, and the Pope needs to speak out against what Biden is doing on getting rid of the Hyde Amendment and every other pro-life law, including conscience rights. He wants to get rid of the ability, he's certainly not enforcing the law, the Weldon Amendment and the others that are already in effect, to say clearly and unambiguously, you cannot be coerced into performing or assisting in an abortion. And that goes for Catholic hospitals and everyone else.
Great points. Congressman Chris Smith, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. We'll check in with you soon.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Thanks for having me on.